ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه. اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. My name is Joyce, and I want to tell you about my journey to finding the straight path of Islam. I was born in November 1947, on the 29th. Actually, I was a little bit early, but I think it was because Allah had a plan for me to learn about Islam, because on that day, November the 29th, was the day that the United Nations voted to form the land of Israel. And as you know, in today's day, it's become somewhat of a problem. As far as I know, in my family, no one has ever been a Muslim, but who knows? I had my mitochondrial DNA traced by the National Geographic Genome Project, and it shows that my ancestors did travel through Muslim lands, so they very well could have been practicers of the original Islamic faith, the primordial faith. My dad was from Eastern Europe, and those countries had a lot of Islamic influence, so who knows? We just never know about anything. But as I said, as far as I know, no one in my family was Muslim. However, I would be glad if they were, but I was raised a Roman Catholic and went to Catholic school until I was in the second year of high school. And in going to high school and studying Spanish really became my first introduction to Islam. You probably know that Spain was part of the Iberian Peninsula, and that part of the world was highly influenced by Muslims. For over 700 years, Muslims lived in Spain, and they contributed to the art, the culture, the language, the music, the food. Everything has been influenced by the Islamic culture. After high school, I went to college, and I just kind of got away from my faith. I am like most college kids. I just sort of put it into the corner of my life, not thinking anything about God, not paying any attention to anything, just going on my merry way, trying to go to school. I got married early, had my daughter, went through a difficult marriage, and even in that time, I really didn't go to church. I did read a lot about different faiths. I started to learn about astrology. I read about Zen Buddhism. I was searching all the time. Eventually I divorced, and after a few years I remarried and continued my searching until I moved to California and went through a very difficult emotional period, suffering a lot of anxiety. And at that time I started to go back to church and had what Christians call a born-again experience. It was also when I was living in California that I met some Iranian friends. It was through my daughter, who became friends with a girl in her school, and I got to know the couple. And I learned about Iran, I learned a little bit about Islam, and I bought my first copy of the Quran and read it, because I wanted to know about the people, and I wanted to know about their country, about their religion, everything about them. I've always been interested in knowing about people. I like people, and I want to know everything about them. And their religion is one thing that helps form their culture. We moved away from California, moved back to Kansas City, and there I just did my work and was active in the church. And after a few years we moved to Nebraska, and there I met another friend whose husband was from Iran. She had actually lived there for a while, and she taught me a lot about Islam. She taught me a lot about the food and the culture and the customs, and I was very interested in it, very intrigued by it. And after a few years, she had to move because her husband got transferred, and she lived out in California, and then I moved to Minnesota. And I didn't really think anything more about Islam or anything else, really. I just volunteered at the zoo. I worked for the bookstore I had been working for in Omaha, Nebraska. I started going to Bible studies at church and became active in my church up to a point. But I started having a strange feeling. I can't really explain it. I started feeling that God had something special that He wanted me to do. And I just didn't know what it could possibly be, because I have never seen myself as a tool of God, but one never knows. And I started doing things that I even surprised friends of mine. I'd never been a person who liked to drive, but I decided I needed to learn how to drive more. And so I drove all the way to Omaha, Nebraska to work for my job. I went to confession to my priest, and I told him that I felt that God had a special mission for me, and he looked at me as if I were strange, which is understandable, I suppose. And then, very suddenly, in 1998, my husband died of a heart attack. He was only 46 years old. And I thought, well, maybe this has something to do with it, but I just didn't know. As you can well imagine, I was very distressed, and it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I started to become very active at my church, and I was involved in fundraising for a new school. I continued volunteering at the zoo. I spent some time traveling. I went to Spain, and I got to see all of the things I had studied about when I studied about Spain, and saw the mosque in Cordoba and the Alhambra, which is a palace in Granada of the Moorish kings. And I really enjoyed my trip there. And I still kept feeling God wanted me to do something. And for some reason, I thought God wanted me to pray the Catholic Rosary for peace in the world. And I know the world was, a little bit in turmoil at that time. This was in the early part of 2001. But I thought it was sort of odd that God wanted me to do this, but He had been calling me to do it for about 2 years, and finally I said, okay, fine, I'm going to do it. And then all of a sudden, September 11th happened, and I realized, oh, that was why God wanted me to pray for peace. And I and all of my friends were just really dumbfounded that somebody would hate us that much. And I think it came to be a time that many Americans started to realize that everything just wasn't as rosy as we thought it was. And then I started to want to learn more and more about Islam. I wanted to know who were the people that were doing this. Why were they doing this? Was it part of the religion? Was it part of our governmental policies? What was going on about it? I attended a series of dialogues at a mosque in Bloomington, Minnesota, and started to try to become friends with some of the ladies, but then I had to move into a smaller house, and I just stopped doing it. I think I knew that I was supposed to be a Muslim even at that time, but quite frankly, I didn't want to give up alcohol. I certainly didn't want to give up pork. I certainly didn't want to wear a scarf. I didn't want to pray 5 times a day. I didn't want to do any of that. But, God kept calling me, and I did read more books about Islam, and I studied more things, and I read in the Quran, and I began to even wonder when I was going to Mass, should I be saying the creed? Did I really believe in what it was saying. Finally, I said, look, God, if you want me to be a Muslim, you're going to have to give me a really big sign. I'm just not going to do this unless I get a really big sign. So you're going to have to send me a teacher. At that time, I was taking classes at the University of St. Thomas, and I was enrolled in Theology 101, which was beginning Christianity, the underpinnings of Christianity, so to speak, its early history. And I thought I was quite safe taking that class. There was no teacher going to show up who was going to teach me about Islam in that class. And what happens? In walks a man who was learned and a sheikh and had studied in Iran and was a Shiite Muslim. As you know, people from Iran are Shiite Muslims, and I suddenly realized that, oh, well, God sent me a teacher. And so then I made the decision very quickly that I had to become a Muslim. And I did make my Shahada on March 17th, 2007, and I've been working very hard to try to be a Muslim. It's hard for me because I don't really have a large circle of friends and don't live in a Muslim household, so it makes it difficult. But I am trying, and I'm very at peace with the decision, and I'm glad that I did it. And I'm now called Sister Zara. Salam alaikum.